There's a video from Out of Characters called The Case for Playing Bricks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which touches on a very, very relevant topic, I believe, which is engine requirements, which is something that I personally hate. I personally hate playing engine requirements. You know this about me. I suffer every time I have to put a Cyframe driver into my deck or anything of that nature. But I, of course, understand that there's sometimes a need and sometimes that these cards are actually optimal to play. But I feel like this is an interesting discussion topic. I like, you know, topics like this.
If you play Dotscaper, you're behind. Read a tweet by pro player and YouTuber PackTCG on February 4th, 2025. Once a common engine choice in Malice, Dotscaper had vanished from the 4 lists that pushed through the top 16 at YCS Orlando just a few days prior. The card was typically banished off of the effective red ransom, allowing it to special summon itself to the field to extend a combo. It had assisted players in making some of the most costly boss monsters in the deck, which had subsequently been removed from lists that made it that far. It was not a card you wanted to see. It was not a card you wanted to draw. Dotscaper was a Garnet. If you're new to Yu-Gi-Oh!, Garnet is a bit of common jargon in the game. It refers to cards that you have to play for your strategy, but don't want to see in your opening hand.
How many Garnets are there in this deck?
Count them. I don't know a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. Oh no, there weren't. No, there were 2 Zephyrs. About 16 or so.
16 Garnets?
A third of your deck is Garnet.
What the fuck?
The quintessential Garnet is the card the term is named after,
Classic Duncan.
Gem-Knight Garnet. Back before Gem-Knight was a deck that went second in OTK'd, or went first in FTK'd, it was a deck that didn't really do anything at all. However, it did possess one singular good card, Brilliant Fusion. Brilliant Fusion is a continuous spell that lets you fusion summon using materials from your deck, and if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh! At any
And this is where my hate for it started. From the beginning, I hated playing with Brilliant Fusion. I think this is the first example of this that I remember, which is probably why it's called Garnet. I can't think of an older one. Even though I feel like we've talked about this before. I think there were older examples, but I didn't play those.
time within the last 10
Oh yeah, Genix Undyne and Controller. That was the one. That was the first one, yeah.
years,
I already hated the
How
controller.
good of an effect that is. Using Brilliant Fusion to summon Gem-Knight Seraphinite got you access to a monster, the ability to send a light monster from your deck to the graveyard, and a second normal summon, which basically made it the best extender you could have for a period of about 5 years. Entire meta-relevant decks were built around it before it got limited in January of 2019 and banned in January of 2020. You might think that Brilliant Fusion is broken, and it certainly is, but it does have a couple of glaring drawbacks. The fusion materials you use with it must come from the deck, so if you draw all of them, you are no longer able to use Brilliant Fusion.
Oh wait, you can't even use the Brilliant Fusion because he drew the Garnet. Yeah. 60 card deck, he drew the Garnet.
Yeah, he's got 2 deck cards actually.
I don't like his deck building.
This might not be so bad if these cards were decent.
I don't like his deck building. It's crazy, considering how it's probably correct in 60 to not play multiple Garnets.
In their own right, and warranted playing multiple copies, so let's take a read of Garnet and...
This card is useless.
For most decks, Garnet is the best card you can play to make Brilliant Fusion work, with other choices only being preferable in specific strategies, and also awful to draw. Brilliant Fusion isn't the only card that worked like this. In the years following 2015, a number of cards were printed and saw meta viability that copied Brilliant Fusion's homework. 3 busted
I hate all of them.
cards you want to play, 1 terrible card that you have to play.
I've seen some posts in Zodiac from casual players that don't understand why people play 3 Brilliant Fusion and 1 Garnet, or a 3-star rotation and 1 Oracle Zephyra, and they're like, why do you want to play cards that are terrible to draw? And one of the things that's really happened in the last year, maybe 2 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that we've gotten a ton of powerful cards that require you to play awful cards to compensate for them. And I think that's hilarious. I think that's...
I disagree. I guess I see where you're coming from, and I do understand why people play it, but I hate it.
I think that's a cool way to design...
No, it's
I don't
not.
want to say broken cards, but powerful cards, for sure.
No, it's not.
Though the theory behind these risky cards was often debated by casual players, the results didn't lie. Decks playing Garnet to enable strong playmakers achieve top, after top, after top, after top, after top. These cards were strong starters, strong extenders, strong disruption, and all played awful cards to make it happen.
Okay, let me explain. I 100% understand that these cards are good, and that it's a lot of the times correct to play them. The reason why I don't think it's good design is because you're making... It's just a way to introduce arbitrary variance into the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I'm just not a fan of. Like, I'm not a fan of winning a game because my opponent has drawn an unusable card. I'm not a fan of losing a game because I've drawn an unusable card. And I'm not a fan of having access to an overly powerful card just at the cost of basically playing a completely dead card in my deck as well, right? Like I just don't think that is a good and healthy concept, because like, and it's not as simple as saying like, oh, just don't play those cards, because sometimes it is optimal to play those cards because the gamma is just that powerful, right? But it just introduces an aspect of luck into the game that has nothing to do with skill at all, which is just, am I going through a tournament and drawing the driver like never, or like multiple times, right? And this is like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's good design, but I think it's, I can see why people disagree with that, but I personally don't like it.
A couple of these cards even aged gracefully, and we'll get into why that might be, but one thing you might notice is that all of the cards I'm talking about were printed prior to 2018. You might think this is a flavor of the time thing, like how in 2024 Konami really liked monsters in the spell trap zone, and monsters that special summon themselves when searched, and monsters that did both.
Uh-oh.
This isn't really true though, because Garnet heavy packages never really stopped getting printed. After the April 2020 rules revisions, we saw the introduction of stuff like the Dragoon package, DPE, the Adventure engine, the Examina engine, and Silhouette Rabbit. These cards were
hate all of it.
Were flashes in the pan, around for a format or two and then gone. You can argue about the conditions around them that enabled their viability, but many of these have been available in formats of late like Master Duel and have not been the correct choices at the highest levels. If people were behind before, they've been catching up. The fall-off in choices like these highlight a general shift in deck-building philosophy that has taken place within the last couple of years. As the quality of engine cards has increased, more space in any deck has to be dedicated to non-engine. Let's take a look at the top 32 deck lists of the last 4 NAWCQs and compare their non-engine counts. This year, decks like Malice have pushed the envelope for non-engine, with these cards making up 46% of space in deck lists across the total field. In 2024, when Tenpai was viable, top 32 decks were 43% non-engine on average, which is higher than 2023 and 2022.
That's an interesting stat to look at. I haven't looked at it that way. Yeah, I guess the non-engine count in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gone up.
Heavy decks similar to Fur Hire, Plants, or Branded did not crack top 32 at this year's NAWCQ, with the last hint of Memento being eliminated in top 64. Beyond that point, non-engine composed at least 40% of each player's deck minimum. As engines have become more compact and explosive, players need higher numbers of hand traps or board breakers to be able to defeat their opponents. The ideal of opening 1 to 2 hand traps of yesteryear has turned into 2 to 3 today, which puts a heavy incentive to cut any engine pieces you don't need and don't want to draw. In a Twitter thread from January of 2025, Yu-Gi-Oh! Streamer and ardent out-of-characters fan Peeps Yugioh discussed how wide the applications this trend in deck building had, ranging from recently meta-relevant strategies like Fiendsmith Kashtira to rogue decks like Shark.
Reevaluating the common consensus around deck lists has been the most engaging experience for me in the modern metagame. I'm playing a Shark list that sets up one Toad, Kraken, Virtue Stream as its end board, and it's more than enough. Shaved all the bricks. I cut ancient...
January 25. I'm playing a Shark list that sets up one Toad, one Kraken, one Virtue Stream. I'm gonna be honest with you, in January 25, I think a lie has been told. I think a lie has been told that one Toad, Kraken, and Virtue Stream is enough of an endboard in January 25. Because if I remember correctly, that was Ryzeal and Malice format.
Your box from Striker Machine. I'm playing low to the ground and playing impactful non-engine. It feels so good. The cards I'm drawing are usable.
Garnets like Ancient Gearbox can be nice to have to make certain combos more efficient or powerful, but they bring the average quality of your opening hands down. In order to main deck the proper amounts of non-engine to be able to play when you go second, these cards are the first to be put on the chopping block. You need to draw cards that either help you combo or stop your opponent, which means even a couple Garnets might be a contributing factor to a deck being rogue when compared to tier 1 strategies. Due to large attendance and extra rounds of Swiss required for 8-person top cuts, players at YCSs are playing more rounds now than ever before. If you play enough rounds, you will draw Garnets, and you will lose matches because of them. One of the biggest changes wrought by modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is this need for consistency. Though there are a variety of traits you can use to judge decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, 2 of the most important are consistency and power. The height of power in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the first turn kill, or FTK, has been in the game for over 20 years now.
What is this?
The prevalence of one-card combos and cards that double as starters and extenders are not power creep, but consistency creep. Increased consistency allows decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! To play through more and more low-impact disruption, with cards that were turn-ending in years past merely becoming a nuisance to decks today. Creep-in consistency thus requires higher counts of non-engine to attempt to put a stop to these combos. This creates a bit of a vicious cycle, with new cards and archetypes being designed with even greater consistency to accommodate these high hand trap counts. This pattern squeezes out any card that is not absolutely necessary for the engine or the non-engine, making Garnets way more of a drawback now than they might have been in years past. Scaper was not the only Garnet in Malice. Alliance Insight, dropping at the beginning of May for the TCG, introduced quite a bit of powerful support for the deck in the form of 2 new main deck cards, as well as Backup, Wizard, and Allied Code Talker at Ignister. These cards added extension, consistency, and endboard pieces to the Malice deck that it did not have.
In this regard, I want to say one thing is like, I've come to terms with engine requirements as a whole, like being a thing. I think there are some that I'm much more willing to play than others. And I'm always happy when, or happier when something like that happens, rather than something being a full-on brick. Like, something like Flamberge, I think, was pretty bad design. Something like Malice in the Mirror, on the other hand, and you're not going to hear me say this often about a Malice card, but I think Malice in the Mirror is a completely fine designed card in that sense, because drawing the card actually had a purpose. Like, drawing Malice in the Mirror, even though you usually preferred not to, which is why it was a one-of, is not as bad. And the same is true for Wizard at Ignister. Like, those cards, if you just look at them through the lens of, is this a Garnet, is this a brick, I think they are much better designed than something like a Cypherum Driver or a Flamberge, because they can actually be used when they're drawn. And now, of course, some people are going to actually me and say, like, okay, sometimes you can discard Flamberge for Nightmare Phoenix going second and it's insane. Yeah, sure, of course. There are some situations where Flamberge was okay, but in general, just like slapping a whole bunch of power on a card, on an archetype, just by introducing essentially a brick 95% of the time, I think was not very good design in regards to like the philosophy I have when it comes to Garnets.
Before, solidifying its tier 1 status in a higher powered format. When these cards were sleeved up, something had to be put in the binder, and which cards those would be.
So you mean Star Ryziel is a worse designed card than Malice? Not as a whole, no. If you just look at it through the lens of Garnets, yes, I think Star Ryziel is a pretty poorly designed card. Star Ryziel is a pretty poorly designed card in general. But I'm not talking about like the power level of Malice here. I'm talking about the design of specifically Malice in the Mirror and Wizard at Ignister. This has nothing to do with which deck I like more, you know, like there are decks that I really like, but then there's individual cards in them that I think are designed poorly, and then there's archetypes that I don't like Malice, but then I think there's cards inside Malice that are designed well. Like, I think Malice in the Mirror is a fine designed card.
Became clear following YCS Providence just a few days later.
Brick is not bad design though. Why every card needs to be valuable in hand? Yeah, Bricks is bad design. That is my point. I think having a card in your hand that does nothing is bad. I think that is a bad playing experience, and I think that is bad design, because that is something you have no control over and has nothing to do with skill, which I think Yu-Gi-Oh should be about. I think incentivizing people to play cards that do nothing when being drawn is not good. I don't like that.
Most lists that made Top Cut had cut Malice Code TB11, the new Allied Code Talker, and opted to side deck Malice Code GWC06. These decisions...
If a deck doesn't FTK, they deserve the bricks. Okay, here's my solution. Make the deck not an FTK. How about that? I think if a deck FTKs, I don't think an FTK combo becomes okay because the deck bricks sometimes. That is my point. I think it is, I think it's not good design if you say, okay, this deck FTKs, but at least it's got some bricks. Okay, cool. Now you've introduced 2 forms of terrible gameplay at once. It's an FTK deck, and there's bricks in it. Like, it's
were made in private testing circles, and Jibriel Braithwaite from Team JNC made it to top 8 piloting a list like this. Pack, a testing partner of his, made another tweet that received a bit of attention.
You're behind? No, I'm not. I don't play Dot Scraper.
I'm sorry, man. You're behind.
This guy's behind, chat. He's behind, bro. What the fuck?
Guys, if you play Dot Scraper, you're behind, man.
Man, if you're not on Deep Sweeper, you're behind.
Yeah, if you're not on Deep Sweeper, you're behind.
You're behind.
You're behind.
If you main GWC, you're behind.
Dude, I forgot how much they memed on Pack for this.
If you play A Code Talker, you're lost. This is not a video about monetized spreadsheets, and Pack wrote up an apology about the whole situation, so I won't waste any more time by digging.
Well, I mean, the situation was a little bit more nuanced than that, right? It wasn't, the tweet itself was what the problem was. I feel like the problem was that I think it was something like he was selling spreadsheets that had combos including these cards and then posted that after a YCS or something. I don't know.
Digging up the drama today. However, what I do think is interesting is that these changes didn't exactly stick. By July, everyone was behind and lost because Allied Code Talker was back in extra decks, and for many, GWC06 was in the main.
So here comes that GWC. I think most players have been running it this weekend. There was a big discussion, I think, as to whether you still needed to run it. Now you have all the other tools available to you, and I feel like for a brief period of time everyone had decided not to run it, but now everyone's decided to put it back in again.
Of course, as metagames develop and new sets release, individual cards often enter and leave decks, but for Malice, the consensus became that these cards were worthwhile to have. There are a variety of factors that could have contributed to this backslide. Malice was often oversided against at Providence due to it being highly feared. As this was corrected, pilots could afford to cut cards like Nightmare Cerberus in favor of Allied Code Talker. With Bestials on the rise in Malice, GWC was a nice extender and important to keep crucial engine pieces like White Binder in rotation. Or, as Aditya Darap so eloquently put it,
do not cut this card. I have nothing to say, just don't cut it.
In my opinion, a reason these cards wormed their way back into decks is because there's a limit to the amount of engine cards you can cut. Let's compare Aditya's deck at the NAWCQ to another talented Malice player who had an honestly phenomenal year, Lucas Sacco. Lucas ended the 2024-2025 season with 5 YCS tops, including a top 8 finish at YCS Providence, which qualified him for the World's Points playoffs. For those unaware, 2 of the people that attended Worlds from North America achieved their spot in a 16-person bracket, composed of those who earned the most points from topping high-level events during the year. Win just 3 matches, and you're headed to Worlds, baby. In this event, Lucas picked this deck list, which was by no means standard. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. The best decks at tournaments often aren't standard. Lucas's deck opted to play a frankly unprecedented amount of non-engine, shaving cards like the 3rd copies of Backup Ad Ignister and Marchhare for a whopping 23 total hand traps. GWC is not in this deck, main or side. Most controversially, the spell Malice in the Mirror is nowhere to be found, widely considered a one-of by most players. These last 2 cards are garnets. They don't do anything on their own, and it makes sense to see them as optional when trying to include as much non-engine as you can when building a deck. Lucas made a reflection video on his performance in the points playoffs, and in it he goes over Game 2 of the first round of the tournament. Down a game and playing for his tournament life, his opponent both Lancias and Perulias him, making it difficult to put up disruption. He is able to make it to the classic Malice halfboard of Red Ransom Pass, but it puts him in a sticky situation. Malice is an explosive deck. If Lucas can survive his opponent's turn, he has enough engine cards in rotation that he might be able to win even after facing down his deck's strongest counter in Lancia. However, he is not playing Malice in the Mirror, a card you would almost always search off of Red Ransom in this situation. His opponent, Nate Shimada, opens a copy of Axed Ryziel, allowing him to force out one of Lucas's spell traps early. Actually having Malice in the Mirror here could have at least denied his opponent the search off of Axed after it ate the Valen pop. Lucas desperately needed disruptions, and he just couldn't access enough of them here to save himself from losing this game. There are a variety of factors that contributed to Lucas's loss, and I definitely don't have the credentials that he does to analyze them properly, so I recommend checking out his video. Lucas playing Malice in the Mirror would have resulted in a completely different game down to the hands he might have drawn, and his opponent's hand even contained an unknown card that could have complicated the situation further. However, I do think this extreme approach to Malice was a problem for him at the NAWCQ. At the end of the video,
I mean, even like here's another thing with situations like these, right? This is basically a very, very good example of results-oriented thinking. It's like you take Malice, and we've all done this in the past. Like we've taken a card out of our deck or added a card into our deck and then lost or won the next game because of that decision and then immediately reverted it, right? Like I've been there before. I've taken out a certain card out of my extra deck, and then the very next game I'm like, oh, if I had this here, I would win. So it goes right back in. But like theoretically, what you have to realize, and that's where the difficulty of deck building comes in, is that like just because you lost a game because you didn't play Malice in the Mirror does not even necessarily mean that the decision to cut it was actually incorrect, you know, because it always comes at a trade-off, because of course you had a reason to cut the card and you made that decision because you thought the card you put in instead does more when drawn than Malice in the Mirror would do for you overall in terms of your overall chances, you know. And that's one of the hardest parts in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like making these decisions and then reflecting and evaluating like which ones were correct and which ones weren't, because you know, right? So like it's tough. It's a tough part of deck building in Yu-Gi-Oh! To make these decisions and then properly evaluate which ones were actually correct and which ones weren't, because just because you lost or you won does not mean you did everything right or did everything wrong, right?
He says this.
What I will do better is I will definitely take a look at the decks that I'm going to play going forward, and I think that I need to play higher engine count decks. I think that if a better player has more engine, there's a better chance they break the board, even if the board is stronger, than trying to like nickel and dime the opponent to death with hand traps. I think that playing a larger engine would have been better for me for this event, at least for the main.
Yeah, I think that's also something that this is not always going to be true. It's not always better to play more engine than hand traps, or it's not even always correct to play hand traps in the first place. Sometimes you want to play breakers, sometimes you want to play hand traps, sometimes you want to play neither. You want to play more engine, as much consistency as possible, as much gas as possible. Sometimes you want to play a mix between breakers and hand traps. You have to make the right call like every time, right? This is basically something that I feel like you have to ask yourself this question over and over and over again for each individual event. And sometimes, like, of course, some people are going to have a preference, you know, like that's definitely a thing. Some people prefer the safety of playing more hand traps. Like think of Paulo, who's always been playing like a lot of hand traps. And then there's people who are maybe more comfortable on board breaker decks because they just like letting the opponent make a board and then breaking it and stuff like that. You know, there's definitely player preference, but I personally don't believe that one or the other is like always correct. I think people who prefer one or the other tend to think that that's always the correct way to do it, but I personally think the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. But I don't exclude myself from that point where like I have my bias towards the kind of play styles and deck building styles that I like to play with. And I tend to struggle, especially in formats where my preferred way of decks is not actually the best, you know, because I just keep telling myself, yeah, I can make Fiendsmith Control work copium or whatever, and then shocker, it doesn't end up working, and I should have just played a different deck, right? But it's tough.
Deck. Main event.
This fable illustrates the dangers of going too far. It can be good to cut garnets, but for your deck to be able to perform properly going first, it still needs to be able to disrupt your opponent enough. If one side of the spectrum is consistency, the other side is power. Directly cutting garnets like Malice in the Mirror to benefit your consistency or increase your non-engine count can create a deck that is less powerful, which will also result in losing games that were potentially winnable. What makes deck building in Yu-Gi-Oh! So unbelievably interesting, even in Tier 0 formats, is this push and pull of consistency and power. As weird as it sounds given the game's reputation, building your deck to kill your opponent into the sun just isn't optimal in Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks built to make these sorts of boards are the embodiment of win more. Ideally, you only need enough disruptions to stop your opponent from playing, and each extra disruption is a card that is potentially cuttable to make your deck more consistent or versatile. However, that minimum number of disruptions is usually unclear, so when deck building you have to do your best to figure it out. It changes from format to format, matchup to matchup, game to game. These ideas directly dictate tweaks in card ratios to give players incremental advantages, and it's something that is very important to pay attention to when reviewing the current metagame or constructing your deck for an event. If you look for it in tournament results, you'll always see fluctuations, and these are a product of people playing with these thoughts.
And so what they're talking about right now, I do agree, this is an interesting aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck building. You know, how consistent can I make a deck? How much power can I sacrifice to make it as consistent as possible, to make it as resilient as possible, and so on and so forth. That is and that is even an interesting part that garnets contribute to. You know, I did say earlier, I hate the concept of garnets because I hate what they do to the actual games. You know, like the deck building aspect around garnets is interesting. Like what they're talking about right now, I agree with. That is an interesting part and an important skill in Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. What I'm criticizing about the garnets is how it actually feels when you play Yu-Gi-Oh! When those cards are being drawn. You know, because the deck building decision behind playing a garnet can be as interesting and as correct or incorrect, whatever, But when the card is being drawn, I just think worse Yu-Gi-Oh is being played, and that's something I don't like. But other than that, like I agree with all of the deck building aspects being interesting.
Thoughts, whether they know it or not. It's very easy to take this information at face value and extrapolate on it based on current trends. Maybe next year, every deck at the NAWCQ will be 60% non-engine. Maybe Gamma will someday return to 3 because of the act of playing a deck with Psyframe driver is too unpalatable. However, what's important to understand is that these trends are responses to shifts made in card design. Though large non-engine counts were common at this past year's NAWCQ, certain engines like Vanquish Soul, Draco Tail, and K9 in the post-Justice Hunters format buck them by offering more powerful in-engine plays on the...
Yes, this is another thing. The non-engine count is not only a response to other decks in the format. Like you don't necessarily play 20 hand traps because you need 20 hand traps to stop Snake Eyes, which that's half of the reason. The other half of the reason is you play 20 hand traps because your deck can play 20 hand traps. Like if you're playing if they're designing decks like Malice, which is just like minimal engine requirements, friggin' all one card combos, then yeah, people are gonna slap 20 plus non-engine into that deck. Shocker. What else are you gonna put? Like, yeah, you can put slightly more engine requirements, but realistically, the deck was powerful enough to win without those. So what's left? Like, yeah, I'm gonna play 20 plus non-engine in that deck, and that's true for a lot of one card combo decks, even modern Yummy. Yes. The only difference between modern Yummy and other decks is that Yummy's power level in terms of the end board is a little more breakable, so I tend to think that makes it a little more acceptable. But in terms of just deck building wise, no one is surprised that Yummy is playing 20 non-engine because the deck is made to do that, right? And that used to be an acceptable concept for certain decks, like for example Marincess. Marincess always was a deck like this, which played like efficient one card combos, minimal engine requirements, and could play like 20 hand traps. So Marincess was like, it was one of the first examples of this that I can think of. There's maybe even older ones, but you know, the problem is that, or like the thing that happened in 2024 is that they just made a lot of those decks. They made a lot of those decks and they made them like not even less powerful than other decks, right? Like the thing with Marincess was always like, yeah, you get to play 20 hand traps, but your deck makes weaker boards than other decks. And then all of a sudden they make Snake Eyes and they're like, okay, your deck gets to play 20 hand traps, but is it weaker than other decks? No. Like it makes the best end board in the game right now. And or like Tenpai, your deck gets to play 24 hand traps, but is it weaker than other decks? No, it wins immediately. It basically completely ruined this this graph that they showed a while ago, where it said like, okay, between consistency and power, it's like, yeah, you get both. You just get both with Snake Eye and Tenpai and stuff now. And so like, there's no reason to cut non-engine for more engine if your deck's all one card combos that kill the opponent.
The opponent's turn, supplanting the need for hand traps. Archetypes on the horizon, like Cool Tune, show this idea might turn into a regular design.
Fiendsmith, your deck can play 24 hand traps? Yeah, but until this day, if you think Fiendsmith control was a problem, I'll fight you.
Staple, reducing
because that deck actually had a fine power level.
Despite how nebulous this all is, I want to think there will always be a place for garnets required by cards that do something valuable that no other card can do. Malice in the Mirror is the only useful search target off of Red Ransom when you've been Lancia'd. Gamma and Delta were popular choices for certain decks at the NAWCQ to negate cards like Banished Malice Monsters and Mitsurugi Ritual. While I was working on this essay, I became very curious about Silhouette Rabbit, which is a card that uses a garnet and has been out of the format for a while. It's a negate and a spell trap pop. It never stopped being that just because everyone's Snake Eyes cards are now in a binder somewhere. Silhouette Rabbit hasn't seen a high play rate in the TCG since the death of the snakes last December, and it's kind of crazy considering it's a Link 2 that can put up 2 disruptions. That's arguably a better endboard piece than SP Little Knight, which has seen near ubiquitous play for the last 2 years.
No.
So, where did Rabbit go in 2025? The answer on the surface seems obvious. Garnets are bad. This card is bad going second. This card is bad going second. Silhouette Rabbit is bad. This isn't the full picture though, because in Snake Eyes format these cards are still bad going second. So why was Rabbit viable in the first place? I hit up 3 competitive players that I thought might respond to my Discord DMs. Eva Lees, Joshua Schmidt, and Dan Parker.
Okay,
Eva had a very new
why did you use that picture?
take on it, citing certain interactions in the format that made the card useful in Snake Eye.
It was a good card for Snake Eyes decks because Rabbit could pop the Tenpai field spell, which was very important in that format. It could also be used as a breaker playing into boards due to Snake Eyes Diabellstar summoning, and it was kind of the second best thing you could do with 2 bodies if you already had Masquerena in the tank. You're able to make this thing that gives you a trap, that gives you a summon negate, and also spell trap hop. It's pretty decent value.
Josh had other things to say on it.
I think Silhouette Rabbit's main issue is the fact you have to play a main...
Dude, I was like, I don't remember recording this for them. And now I realize I never did. Yeah, they asked me. I sent them a message and then they asked, can you record it? I forgot. Real voice.
Deck trap for it, which isn't ideal, and I think people are only willing to do this if absolutely necessary. Feels like Snake Eyes had ways of handling this just by pitching the trap for Diabellstar or Nightmare Phoenix when going
Sounds
second.
just like me.
Dan chalked it up to this.
Okay, so what did I say? Oh yeah, I still agree with this. Based Josh from July. I agree with my opinion from 3 months ago. Let's go. I didn't yap. No, I personally think, yeah, the Silhouette Rabbit was fine because Snake Eyes had ways to deal with bad cards in hand, even going second, like Diabellstar Droplet and shit.
Just by pitching the trap for Diabellstar or Nightmare Phoenix when going second.
Yeah. Dan chalked it up to this common and pivotal interaction.
The only way for the opponent to synchro summon into Azaroon was to chain 2 Tenpai monsters together. However, the synchro monsters Trident Dragon and Black Rose Dragon would unfortunately miss.
Did everyone else record theirs and mine is the only one using some random voice? I feel bad now.
Due to their own Tenpai monster effects, and if they try to kill the statue in battle, it would take down its attacker with it.
In 2024, Silhouette Rabbit served a niche. It was an important endboard piece. It was played in a deck that focused on summoning generic links that already made use of its 2 biggest competitors and hungered for more. It was a hard counter to one of the best decks in the format, but useful against many others. It required a Garnet, but the engine you played it in had ways to deal with bad draws natively. It synergized with mechanics that summoned monsters from the spell and trap zone. All of these reasons made Rabbit and its corresponding brick worth playing, until the deck that accommodated it was obliterated. Now, 9 months later, things are changing again. Unlike during Nat's format.
It's funny because Silhouette Rabbit just won a YCS in Europe, but realistically, I guess really thinking about why Silhouette Rabbit saw play in Snake Eyes format and why it doesn't see play now, I think another argument to be made is also just the fact that, like, we have less archetypes at the moment that just, like, spit out link material like it's nothing, right? Like that, because ultimately that was also said about Snake Eye format. Like, yeah, people made Azaroon statue because Snake Eye just had so much link material that even after making IP Masquerena, Moon into Fiendsmith, whatever else, you still had bodies left over. And so people just made a Silhouette Rabbit because and made Appaloosa as well or whatever. And like, okay, well, let's make a Silhouette Rabbit too. Why not? Let's insulate from board breakers even more by setting a trap card that doesn't care about like Dark Ruler and whatnot. I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. And if I draw the trap, so what? If I'm going first, that's okay. If I'm going second, I'll pitch it for Diabellstar, whatever. Right? We have less decks in the game right now that are legitimately just like Link slop. That's just what Snake Eyes was, right? Like a friggin' Link slop deck with infinite bodies. And most decks right now, like maybe Mitsurugi would consider playing Silhouette Rabbit, but they don't have enough link material to make both IP Masquerena and Silhouette Rabbit. Like, and if you have the choice between Silhouette Rabbit and IP Masquerena, you're always making IP Masquerena because IP into SP, first of all, is better, and second of all, doesn't require a brick, right? And so like that's a very natural decision. So I don't. It's more like Silhouette Rabbit with the trap card is more like the third best option for an end board, and people are not making that many links at the moment on their end boards because that's the only way for Silhouette Rabbit to appear, I guess.
Justice Hunters has important field spells with ignition effects, making them worth popping as Disruption, a chain link after they are activated. In decks like Yummy, board breakers are incredibly common. Rabbit can pop these field spells, or negate some of these board breakers through the use of Apophis the Swamp Deity. For a deck like K9 Crystron that already plays a valuable continuous trap as part of the engine and has link material to spare, Rabbit is an appealing option to side deck. Yugioh is endlessly inventive. As the game changes, players will write laws, start trends, and promptly abandon them as new cards and ideas recontextualize how people approach the game. I shudder to imagine a stale Yugioh, because even in its darkest chapters, that is something it has never been. With that, I am out of characters, so I guess this is the end. It was honestly a lot of pressure to put out something
This was
worthwhile
nice.
after my last video, so if you enjoyed this one, I would really appreciate it if you liked it and shared it with someone. Thanks to Eva Lees, Peeps, Mark the Page, Joshua Schmidt, and especially
Yeah, I
Dan
barely
from
did
Yugioh
anything.
Organization for their
I
important
responded to one
contributions this
Discord
essay.
DM.
I've posted links to where you can find them in the description. Also, a massive thanks
Well
to my
done, me.
patrons, including Dan Parker, Drumstep, MBT Yugioh, and Ray. Support on Patreon is what makes putting together videos like this much more just.
Okay. No, this was an interesting discussion. I like that. Oh, I'm not surprised. I'm not subscribed to Out of Character. Let me change that real quick, and you should too. Let me send you the link in chat right now. Please, everyone, do me a favor and send some love over to Out of Characters. Watch till the end. Is there something happening?
Justifiable for me. So if you want to help my work beyond just a like or subscription, you know where to go.
Is the
Be
outro
well,
funny
until next
usually?
time.
Okay, now here's the line again in my horribly botched attempt at Josh's German accent. I'm so sorry to all of our German viewers. I got to lower my voice, not be a tiny gay child anymore. I'm a normal person with a normal person deep voice.